The topic that I'll talk about today is not as amusing as the one I just heard. But I think it's sufficiently important that you should all, half of you are using your mobile phone right now, put it away for a moment. The reason why I think it is important, this is a fake picture, obviously, but I thought it was sufficiently important that even the US government should decide to talk about this. So what I'd like to talk about is sex, not in the future, but in fact what is happening now, even though most people are neither aware of it nor are they willing to admit it. So let's talk about the facts of reproductive life. I could ask you a question and ask for answers, but we don't have enough time. Namely, the question is, how many acts of sexual intercourse do you think occur every 24 hours? Well, you're getting some preposterous answers sometimes. You know, some people say 1 billion. Then I point out that there are only 7 billion in the world, and you need 2 people for that, so you only got 3.5. And then, you know, some people are 5 years old, and some of them are 95, not yet 90, but 95. But the actual fact is that we have roughly 7 billion people right now, and every 24 hours, there are about 100 million acts of sexual intercourse. Now, that's fine. What are the consequences of this? The consequences are that there are about 1.2 million conceptions, of which 50% are unexpected, and another half of these are unwanted. These unwanted ones, I'm talking about the 25%, lead every 24 hours to 200,000 abortions, of which about 60,000 are illegal, the majority of which occur in the all-Catholic countries of Latin America. That is the present situation. The other, and this becomes more relevant to the public that I'm addressing right here, is it whereas in Europe, the average size family is now 1.5 children, and you need 2.1 to reproduce yourself. So obviously we stick at 1.5, and you have no immigration from the countries that have many more children, then of course eventually you'll disappear. We disappear. By comparison, I'll give you Nigeria, it's 5.7 children, Pakistan, 4 children. So you can see what's going on in this case here. Now I'd like to talk about the women who are sitting here in the audience. I suspect that, looking at you, 90% of you have no children. I think the majority of you probably think of maybe you'd have some children, but you're saying mañana. And you're saying mañana either because you're ignorant, which I doubt, or because you'd like to ignore the fact that women, in contrast to men, are born with their eggs. By age 35, they've lost 95% of all their egg cells, and the remaining 5%, these are still a fair number, age very rapidly. So the difference between 30 and 35 years, which is 5 years, and 35 and 40, which is also 5 years, are 2 totally different 5 years. So what is happening there during the second 5 years, 35 to 40, becoming really quite dangerous. The point, the most striking thing, it was recently the Daily Mail, that in UK university graduates, and I assume most of the women who are sitting here are university graduates, wait until the middle 30s, the beginning of the dangerous age, to have the first child. That group of people has doubled in the last 20 years. In fact, everything I'm telling you now, the divorce of sex and reproduction, which is the main theme, occurred only since 1977. That's the femtosecond in world history. And yet the changes have been spectacular, and the consequences are spectacular. By contrast, non-university women, I'm talking about the UK, have their children when they used to have them, average 25 years. The consequences are that the mothers of the university graduates, the present one, or the university graduates, are likely to be grandparents only by the time they're 70. Now, 70 to me doesn't sound extremely old, but it is not very young. And in many societies, the most striking one is China. While China doesn't fit yet into that category, it will fit within 30, 40 years. Grandparents, particularly grandmothers, play an extremely important role in bringing up the children because all the women are working, and some of them are working in occupations which really do not permit them to take care of the children during the day. Now, but the point I really want to make, and that's very important, is that the world cannot anymore be separated into rich and poor, agricultural and industrial, developed or less developed, but it's a pediatric and a geriatric world. You here live in a geriatric world, we live in a geriatric world, and what I'm talking about applies only to the geriatric world, not to the pediatric. So let me emphasize, we're not talking about the entire world, and specifically I'd like to focus primarily on Europe. This is where we live, and as I told you, there are only 1.5 children per family. So what does that mean, pediatric versus geriatric? I want to give you a few examples very quickly. On the right side, you see this demography. On the right side, you see the population pyramid, which is what mankind displayed until less than 50 years ago. Namely, what you're seeing, these are always 5-year intervals, and obviously most people are young, and you have very few old ones. In the last 50 or so years, and gradually that's appearing also in countries that are still pediatric but moving in a geriatric state, the pyramid starts to be converted into column, meaning that roughly all the 5-year segments are about the same number. The most rapidly increasing age group in the geriatric world are people above the age of 85. And the most rapid of them all are the centenarians. Now, this is startling but important. Now, where does this happen? Here you see the countries with the oldest populations. With one exception, Japan, which is the oldest country in the world. All the others are European countries. Notice that some of them already have 20% of the people above the age of 65. Japan will have 30 or 35 by the time it's 2050, when many of you here will be late middle age. Now, how do you run a country that has 35% of the people above the age of 65, who presumably, particularly in Europe, expect to be pensioners and are expected to be supported by the taxpayers and by the workers? Who are these workers, and how are they going to do this? By contrast, look at the pediatric countries, and with one exception, and that's Afghanistan. You see, they're all African countries. Here, close to 50% of the population is above the, I'm sorry, this is wrong here, is below the age of 15. Below the age of 15. So the consequences, of course, are spectacular, and they're economic, they're in terms of work, they're in terms of education, and of course also politically. Here you see a cartoon, which really delineates, as only a cartoon can, the pharmaceutical industry in the world. There are about 20 pharmaceutical companies, international ones, who are responsible for maybe 95%, if not more, of all the R&D and most of the marketing of important drugs. What do they focus on? They focus on the geriatric patients, the one on the bottom, the single old lady who is insured, is taking probably at least half a dozen, if not a dozen pills, and has an unbelievable choice. She does not focus on the pediatric ones you see up on top, in African country, lots of children. The diseases are completely different ones. The diseases we pay very little attention to, primarily parasitic diseases and the like, whereas in the geriatric world, the diseases, of course, deal with Alzheimer's, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, inflammation, and so on. That is the focus. Therefore, not a single one of the 20 largest pharmaceutical companies is working on a contraceptive for males. 2 of the 20 are working on piddling modification of the pill, piddling modification, in other words, not new approaches to contraception, for very obvious reasons. The contraceptive problems of you here, who are sitting here childless, you've solved it unless you have no sex whatsoever, which is unlikely. So therefore, the point is that improvements in contraception would be nice, but they're totally unimportant in the geriatric countries. In the pediatric countries, it isn't new contraceptives that we need. We don't need contraceptive hardware. We need contraceptive software. And software, of course, the political, economic, social, educational, religious problems, and most important, the status of women in these societies. And when that changes, there will be dramatic changes in the population, because the reason why the population in Europe, the average size family went to 1.5 children, is not, even though people like to assume it's a pill, for instance, and I've often been accused of this, look what you've done. And I think it's baloney. Because during that time, this is when women moved into the workforce, which was really only after World War II, and the cultural, the legal restrictions of a male-dominated discipline have started to dissolve, not yet operationally, you know that perfectly well, but legally. And more women move into professions which are difficult ones, which involve long educational experiences, and then, of course, really moving up forward. They're saying manana to a child. The first condition, in this case, in Germany, in German, they have this famous 3 Ks, which is called Kirche, Kinder, Küche, in other words, children, church, and children, church, and kitchen, of course. Yes. I will think already with 3 Cs, because if you now translate it, in German, you can now say another 3 Ks. In the K, instead of Kinder, children, is career. And of course, that is now the dominating factor. Now, I have decided about 25 years ago, after doing 50 years of really serious research, that if I want to talk about software problems, and I started, for instance, teaching in our feminist studies program at Stanford, even though I'm a chemist, and in biomedical ethics, even though I'm a chemist, and in human biology, even though I'm a chemist, because I want to address software issues, which are the ones I just mentioned to you. But I realized that doing this to an audience like you is not enough. These are well-educated people who are either interested in the topics or presumably know something about it, or let's say against them for good reasons rather than just superstition or ignorance. And that I have to use another method of, and I really introduce myself now as an intellectual smuggler rather than as a writer, because I try to use first fiction and now theater, in other words, real case histories, to ascientific, even anti-scientific public that is not interested in these topics, doesn't even think about them, thinks they do not understand them, and say, I'll tell you a story, let me show you a story, and smuggle the information into it. Now, I'll give you 2 examples of this today, and these will be brief excerpts from 2 plays. One of them, we don't have the time to have the actual dialogue, so I'll just tell you about it. And the other one, you will end with 2 minutes from a London production of a play of mine. The play, the first one I want to talk to you about, is called An Immaculate Misconception. The important thing about these plays are, contrast to most other contemporary playwrights, they're all published in books, and not in theater publishers, but in academic or literary publishers, so you can read them. So you don't have to go and see what theater plays it. An Immaculate Misconception is a title which cannot be translated in any other language, because only in English does misconception means misunderstanding as well as misconception. So the titles are different. The German one you see is Unbefleckt, which simply means immaculate. Now I'd like you to look at the covers, because you'll see in a moment how different people use different theater posters, different book publishers to get the message across. So obviously in Immaculate Misconception, the subtitle is very important. Sex in an age of mechanical reproduction, taken after the famous writer Benjamin saying. So in the left you see it's apparently a woman, it's a woman and man. And I make, purposely as a male feminist, the woman the inventor of the technique that I'm talking about, which is called ICSI. You're going to learn about it in just a moment. It's probably the most important advance in reproductive medicine that's been carried out during the last 20 years. It was discovered in Belgium in 1991. You'll learn in a moment what it is. I'm assuming that many of you do not know what it is, although you should. And I make the woman the inventor, so she's in green. And she invited a physician, a reproductive a gynecologist, an obstetrician, to see what she's doing and demonstrating under the microscope. And you actually see it during the play. You'll see them act this out, and what you'll see in a moment is what appears in the play. This play, which was premiered here in Edinburgh at Edinburgh Fringe in 1998, was broadcast by the BBC World Service. It's done by the NPR in the States, the WDR in Germany, and many others. It's been translated by now in 12 languages. Here's a dialogue. Melanie, the woman, and she says to her colleague, ICSI could become an answer to overcoming the biological clock. Remember, this is what I just talked about, that women start postponing childbearing into their late 30s, early 40s. Think of those women right now, mostly professional ones, right here, who postpone childbearing to the late 30s or even early 40s. These are abstracts from excerpts from dialogue. It's not exactly how she said it. Such women could draw on a bank account of their frozen young eggs, in other words. And it's probably some of you are already too old to have done this, but in your 20s, you should have gone or should go and will go, your counterparts who are slightly younger than you, undergo a course of superovulation where you'll produce 6, 12, 20 eggs, which you put in the bank and freeze them young eggs as options, as insurance, just in case you do say mañana too long, and then you can go to the bank. And she makes that point. So they'll go to the bank account for frozen young eggs and have a better chance of having a normal pregnancy later on in life. And he says, near even past the menopause, and remember, for menopause, we're just starting in early 40s to on. And she, of course, says, well, why not? Yeah, you don't have any objections to men becoming fathers in their 50s. Why not women? But she says, reducing the hazards of the biological clock by several years. So remember, we're talking about from 35 to 45. That's only 10 years. But these are very important 10 years in the lives of women, again, like the ones who are sitting right here, many of you. I see no reason why more women shouldn't have that option. Again, we're talking about options. We're not talking about everyone's going to do this. But to be against options is absurd. And then young men, there's also a reason for men doing it, but we don't have time to do this discussion today. Young men and women will open reproductive bank accounts full of frozen sperm eggs, and when they want a baby, they'll go to the bank. Remember what I told you originally, of the 1.3 million conceptions every 24 hours, 50% are unexpected, 25% are unwanted. By this method, there are no unwanted children. There will be no abortions, if everyone did this, which of course is not the case. But we are focusing on wanted children. Wanted children generally are loved children. Loved children are usually a cement for a relationship between individuals, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual. So people who talk about the destruction of the nuclear family are again talking nonsense. It is exactly the other way around. And so when they want to have a baby, they'll go to the bank. And you know what? And he, of course, then says, once they have such a bank account, they might as well get sterilized. And the answer is, of course. Of course, because again, remember, sterilization is in many parts of the world the most common method of birth control, not contraception, because it's essentially irreversible, not completely so, but essentially. In China, of over 50% of married couples, one of them is sterilized. In the United States, of married couples, again, I'm not talking about unmarried, 33%, one partner is sterilized. It is the most general method among married people of birth control, not of contraception. Then you're talking about, obviously, pill, condoms, and so on. And he says, might as well get sterilized. And she says, exactly, they'll do early what millions are already doing now. But if that is the case, then of course you don't need contraception. And just think of the thousands of dollars or pounds you saved during your life in not having to buy contraception if you, in fact, put your gametes, your sperm and eggs into the bank when you're young. And the fact of the matter is that the last 50 years of the last century, from 1960, let's say, or 1950, 1960, to 2000, the leitmotif throughout the world in reproduction was contraception, also in Europe, this is completely changing now to conception in the geriatric world. The focus is now, how do I have that 1.5 children at a time when it is reasonable to have it, when I can afford to have it, when I can really bring them up the way I want to bring them up, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very important change in focus. Let me show you quickly a couple of other cover pictures of that book in different countries. So you see what they read in there, which is rather interesting. Look at the Spanish one. You see a very elegant woman's hand holding a single sperm just in the hand. Well, what this really tells you is that finally the beginning of the change in power relationship. I have to remember, feminism is only a study of feminist studies, is only a study of power relationships, men and women. In sex, men are here and women are down here in the history of mankind. Even now, men in general propose marriage, initiate sexual intercourse, whether it's by persuasion, seduction, or force, doesn't make a difference that way. But look about the power relationship in human reproduction, biologically speaking. We men are totally inefficient. We bombard a woman with 50 or 100 million sperm so that one miserable sperm makes it to the egg. And then we're finished. And I'm not just talking about we humans. Most other species, of course, also do it, have no idea who their offsprings are. A fish doesn't know who is his son or daughter. A mosquito doesn't know it. A snake doesn't know it. In fact, many birds even don't know it. That is very different about humans and very few other species. This is a very discrete way of actually illustrating a change in power relationship. Because if a woman, as you're just going to see now, is going to select in vitro fertilization, then we're getting to the question of the sperm. A man who has only quotation marks, 1 or 2 million sperm in his an ejaculate is infertile. 1 or 2 million sperm. You need only one, remember, to fertilize an egg. The Swedish book, which is rather interesting, Oberfläckad means immaculate. You see the huge egg, and I don't know whether you can see the minute sperm in the lower half of the picture, which of course again shows biologically the completely reverse power relationship here. Here I show you 3 other posters. These are theater posters. So from the Japanese production on the left, you see you have a baby. Remember Japan, oldest country, has enormous population problems, again about 1.5, 1.4 children per family, very xenophobic, really antagonistic to assimilating immigrants, so the problems are even bigger because immigration, which is the only answer you have there, won't really quite work. Nevertheless, you see sort of high tech and a baby. Look at the French one. It's called Une immaculée misconception. In other words, to make a joke out of it. An immaculate misconception, like Miss Paris, Miss Europe, Miss Universe. But what do they use here? The famous Leonardo da Vinci painting, which Leonardo da Vinci, the man, in this case, you see a woman, you see the focus on the uterus and so on. Now look at the Portuguese production, which is rather amusing because it's much more similar to the macho southern societies. In the play, it's a question whose sperm was used. It's not obvious which one of the 2 men. Well, you see the focus here. They say, this sperm is mine. So the focus on the man, in this case here, the woman. Now, this is what you see right now. This is a picture from a theater. This was in Lisbon. You see the woman working on the microscope, the man, the physician, standing there watching what you will see right now, namely a monitor. And what she's doing, ICSI, stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection, which is a big word for injection of a single sperm into an egg. Initially developed in Belgium for male infertility. But as the point that I want to make, the overpowering effect will be on women because they will then be able to use this with their banks in the egg, those that their eggs in the bank, those that will check them out. So what she's showing you is right this here now. And this is from the play. You see it's scene 6. But you see first of sperm. You see sperm run around like man. This is a fertile man. We're talking about fertile sperm after all. And what you have to do is you have to find one. and then you have to immobilize it. So you see he's looking under the microscope for one. Here it is, the victim. And now what you have to do is crush its tail so it doesn't run away. The pipette, just to give you an idea of the size, is 1/10 the size of a human hair. Now, what you're now doing, because now immobilized, aspirate the sperm into the pipette. Now you'll see the egg, and you'll see how enormous it looks on the suction pipette, so it's immobilized, and then you now inject. This is a penetration. You use a pipette rather than a penis, in this case here. And you see the penetration. Look at the sperm, which is still in the pipette, which is about to come out. This would be equivalent to the ejaculation, not of 100 million sperm, but one sperm, and it sits right in the egg where you need it. And you see, as you see the withdrawal of the pipette, you see there's no rupture of the cell membrane. 2 days later, you have, if you have conception, you have fertilization, you have 2 eggs, 4 eggs, 8 eggs, 16, 32. Around that stage, after 3-4 days, that egg gets transferred into the woman, and 9 months later, she's pregnant. We're talking here about fertile women doing that. This, of course, was not a fertile one, where the success rate is about the same as in ordinary coitus, which I think is important to remember. The additional factor, which is overwhelmingly important and happened only during less than 10 years, quite separate from work on reproduction, is the advance in genomics, which of course permit us now to analyze genetical material, which we could never do before. You can do it on one cell. So a woman, let's say, who has an embryo with 32 cells or 16 cells still in the petri dish, you remove one cell, a single one, analyze it genetically for diseases which are particularly more common in women above the age of 35. Down syndrome is an example, but many other genetic diseases, etc. So that'll be another incentive for many women to use that option, even though they may not use it otherwise. So I'm showing you here what is really a monumental advance. Now, I'd like to remind you something. In vitro fertilization, discovered here in England in 1977, by now it's estimated that about 4 to 5 million people in the world have been born without sexual intercourse. Of these, quite clearly 99% are those of people who have had fertility problems, either women or men. That's why they resort to ICSI. That, in my opinion, will change dramatically. It'll change that in the future, as that option becomes common, it'll be fertile people with a much higher success rate who will be using in vitro fertilization techniques such as this one. But there are enormous social consequences. I'm not telling you this is ideal. It is not ideal. There are certain good things, there are certain bad things. And for that, I show you now a play that I wrote, the 6th or 7th play, came out in a book which is called Sex in an Age of Technological Reproduction. There's 2 plays. ICSI, which is a pedagogic play about ICSI for classrooms, not for the theater, and Taboos, which is a play about the real social consequences of this dramatic Brave New World that I'm talking about. There will be about 100 copies of this book around that you people can pick up, but I hope only those pick it up who intend to really look at it, rather than one that you then put on a coffee table. It also contains a DVD, and the DVD contains, among other things, what you just saw. Now what you'll see, and that'll be the end, you'll see an excerpt from that play, which was done in from the London premiere a couple of years ago. And what you're going to see, there are 2 couples in there. One is a lesbian couple who decides to have children, and one is a highly religious, typical American fundamentalist Baptist family from the South who are completely against, obviously, homosexual parenthood and even artificial insemination. Yet, they also have problems and therefore have to resort to ICSI. And you'll see here a dialogue between a lesbian woman who is pregnant and the man who happens to be the brother of her partner. That's incidentally a very logical choice. People don't think about it. In ordinary sexual intercourse, you mix 50% of genetic material. Lesbians, at best, could do it with 25% if they use a brother of the other partner. which sounds weird, but there's no reason whatsoever. In fact, it would be even more intelligent to use the father of the other person, because then you get 50% of the genetic material. But in this case, it is the brother. The brother is a religious person, but who nevertheless was tempted to do this because she promised to give him some of the unused embryos for his infertile wife. So you'll hear the dialogue. He is a Southerner, so you'll see the Southern accent, and she is a typical American.
You got out of the loop once you masturbated.
Much obliged, ma'am, for this clear explanation.
Oh, yeah, I'm not finished. The moment the embryo implanted in my uterus, I gave you the remaining embryos to do with as you please. That was the only bargain between us. The fact that your wife is now pregnant with one of those embryos, that's your responsibility, not mine. When this boy is born, he will be my son. When Priscilla gives birth, that will be your son. Is that understood? Let's not confuse those two sons.
It's not as simple as that.
Oh, yes, it is.
And if I have feelings,
then you deal with them. But you and your Christian wife, you have no rights over my son.
is that a threat?
I wouldn't dream of threatening you. I like you. I'm just giving you the facts.
How do you know they'll both be sons?
Because I wanted mine to be a son.
But that's no guarantee. God decides what we get, and we'll be grateful for whatever blessing He bestows.
Cameron, I am not going to argue religion with you. This is biology. We used ICSI for the fertilization, right?
Right.
A single sperm injected into each egg, right?
Right.
Okay, the sex of the child is determined by the sperm. A Y chromosome bearing sperm leads to a boy, an X chromosome bearing sperm leads to a girl. You must have learned that in high school, even in Mississippi.
Yes, I did, but what are you saying?
That the technology now exists, it's called flow cytometry, to separate X from Y sperm.
You separated my sperm?
Yes.
And you didn't ask for my permission?
Well, that wasn't part of the bargain.
Sex predetermination is one of the problems that, of course, is completely possible now with 100% certainty. Again, in a European family, it probably doesn't make any difference. If this were widely used in, let's say, China and India, and by there you're talking practically about 1/3 of the world's population, it would have unbelievable consequences, because in those cultures they prefer a male child, and in China, for instance, now there's a one-child per family policy. So you're talking about a skewing of the sex ratio with disastrous consequences. This is only one of the problems. There are many others, but I want to show you that it's not black and white. In the play, you in fact learn both sides, because this is not the selling instrument. It is only one to alert women that they have an option. And it's women, as I said, like the ones that are sitting here, who will have to think about these options. What is then interesting that the future family, until now, and that is part of the Catholic doctrines, also other religions, where you should only have sex if you have potential reproductive consequences. The separation of sex and reproduction has already occurred. In Italy and Spain, where they have only, all Catholic countries, they have only 1.2, 1.3 children. Well, they may have only 1.3 times sexual intercourse before they got pregnant, but they have surely hundreds of times after that. So that separation of sex and reproduction is here. Sex for love, lust, fun, curiosity, you name it, wherever you do it, in bed or elsewhere. Reproduction under the microscope for that 1.5 children that you'll have that are plant children. But that then means that officially reproduction by fertile people will not anymore be done necessarily by coitus, but in the laboratory. And therefore the argument that against contraception and that a marriage depends reproductively on sexual intercourse will be dead. And that has very important consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. Just two very quick questions. So when, back in the early 50s, you were doing this research that led to the first oral contraceptives, did you have any idea of the social change that would lead to?
Of course not. No one did. Because contraception was not really on the radar of any pharmaceutical company or really of the public. What dramatically changed the pill, our work, I'm a chemist, our work was done in 1951. It was first approved for medical use in 1957, for contraceptive use in 1960. Within 2 years, 2 million women in the United States had it. No one predicted this. It was women who made the change. And the reason why they made it, and what people ignore, they think the pill was responsible for the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s. Remember the 60s were the year of the rock and roll music scene, the drug scene, the hippie scene, and most importantly, the beginning of the really flowering of the feminist movement. All four of them had something to do with sexual liberation at a time when abortion was totally illegal. So you would have had hundreds of thousands, probably millions of abortions that were prevented by this. And it was that freedom, the fact that you could separate sex from contraception. You didn't always have to say, just a moment, I gotta get a condom, just a moment, I have to put in a diaphragm. That has been a dramatic change. So the pill has greatly facilitated it, but I don't think it has caused it. And just as this same thing about the things I showed you, like ICSI, to think that ICSI is changing the sexual behavior or the reproductive behavior of women, and obviously of men, is wrong. In my opinion, it is the social movements that have caused this. The fact that women can move into professions which require that they work longer is that makes it easy to introduce such new technologies.
Last quick question. You just wrote a piece for us in Wired about why you think there's never going to be a male contraceptive. Just in a sentence, explain your thinking.
Well, I think you should read it because you all got the copy of it in your. But the answer is very simple. I only want to tell you it's not a scientific question. We know exactly how to make a male pill. We have done so. There are hundreds of men who everyone has tried it clinical, so we know it works. So that's not the reason. The reason is entirely an economic, or you could say the cultural, most economic. There is not a single pharmaceutical company that is interested in this, and for good reasons. And those good reasons I describe in there.
On behalf of everybody here, Carl, thank you for all the conception-free sex.
You want to tell them the other guy.